Hey everyone, Jacob here from Painted for Combat, and if you've watched either of my recent videos, these terrain tiles will be familiar to you. And today we're printing a bunch of them. Let's get to it. These are dungeon blocks, a grid-based terrain system for tabletop gaming that replaces traditional battle maps or dungeon tiles with no clips and no magnets. You just slot them together, almost like building your maps from giant D&D Lego bricks. In my last couple of videos, I printed off a couple of smaller sample sets, and have really fallen in love with the system. So much so that I've already printed off a giant grid that fully covers the 32-inch TV that I usually use for D&D battle maps. And today we're going to start filling it up with its very first map. The beauty of the system is that not only do they provide some examples, but when you buy a pack you also get access to that set on their web-based Dungeon Blocks builder, where you can digitally plan your maps and export parts lists that will tell you what blocks you need. And if you tell it what blocks you already have, it can let you know which blocks you're missing, which is awesome. Today I want to recreate a map, one that I've already used in my current D&D campaign. The front gates to the city of Argentum, a major city in my group's homebrew world of Merion. We had a combat encounter on the original version of this map in the very first session of our current campaign. Actually, if you want to see that session, along with the first 20 or so of our current campaign, are already released over on Painted for Combat's sister channel, Roll for Adventure, where currently I'm the Dungeon Master for our long-running narrative-driven D&D campaign that's releasing weekly over on that channel. Links below. Today I'm only using the blocks from the Ramparts and Ruins campaign for this map, and don't quite have the pieces to recreate this map one for one. But I'm really liking where I got this to. It's definitely recognizable as the same map, and still has all of the important features of the original. Now that we have our map built, we can export a parts list, which will tell us exactly the blocks we need to build our map, and a print list, which lets me know which blocks I'm actually missing for the design, so that I can head on over and get those set up for 3D printing. Yes, this system is designed to be 3D printed. Today I'll be printing in FDM, and because the system requires no supports for the FDM parts, we could just throw the blocks into our slicing software and we're ready to go. Personally, I scale all of my dungeon blocks down to 91.4%. I find that this works a little bit better for standard D&D base sizes, but still keeps all of the functionality of the Dungeon Blocks system. Now that we have all of our blocks laid out, I'll be printing all of these with a 0.4mm nozzle, and my printer's default 0.2mm layer height standard print profile, with just one very minor tweak. I dropped the top surface speed from its default 200mm a second all the way down to 30, just to make sure I'm getting as smooth a possible top layer on any of those flat tile blocks. Today I'll be printing all of these dungeon blocks on the Elegoo Neptune 4 Pro, one of Elegoo's current generation of FDM 3D printers. I like the Neptune 4 Pro because it has a relatively large build volume of 225 by 225 by 265mm, which means we can print off a bunch of blocks on a single build plate. And with its preloaded clipper firmware, it can print up to 500mm a second, so we'll be able to get these dungeon blocks printed off fast. It also supports features like pressure advance and input shaping to maintain high-quality, detailed prints at these speeds. And with its dual-gear direct drive extruder and custom hot-end assembly, it'll be able to print at those speeds with no heating issues. Elegoo were kind enough to send this printer over for the video, so you should definitely treat this video as an ad. If you want any more details about this printer or the slicing software that I'm using, you can check out my first look video down below. It came out last week and goes over everything from unboxing and setup of the Neptune 4 Pro to printing some great looking terrain and miniatures with the printer. And if you want to pick up a Neptune printer, or any of Elegoo's other products, there are some affiliate links down below. If you choose to purchase anything after clicking one of those links, a small amount of your purchase will be kicked back to me to help support the channel, at no extra cost to you. In total, for all 188 blocks, it took about 81 hours to print. Give or take a couple of hours for a few minor print failures, and we used about 1.7 kilograms of filament. 81 hours might sound like a long time, but broken down, that's under half an hour per block on average. And you have to take into account that that's including some of the larger pieces. The various risers, the tall walls, and the gates, which all took over an hour, if not more, each, which means that our smaller blocks probably didn't take any longer than 15 or 20 minutes on average. With those speeds and in that time frame, it means I was able to print all of the blocks for this project in a single week, which is kind of crazy for me coming over from previous generation printers, where a project like this easily would have taken double the amount of time. if not triple or more. But now that they're all printed, it's time to paint. I'm priming all of these blocks with one of two colours. For all the trees, grasses, and pathways, I'll be using Hunter Green from Rust-Oleum, which is unfortunately a gloss paint, but we'll be able to fix that with some matte varnish later down the road. And for all the buildings and stone elements, Rust-Oleum Flat Grey Primer, which has a nice matte finish. For the dirt pathways and tree trunks, I don't want to have to base coat all of these by hand. So I'll pull out my crappy little airbrush and shoot through some old Army Painter fur brown. I finally bought myself a proper compressor for my airbrush, now that I have a little bit of extra room over on the new shelves, which made it better, but it's still a very cheap piece of junk, which I might actually have a fix to in next week's video. Stay tuned. With primer and base coat supplied, it was time for some dry brushing, or more accurately probably overbrushing. Now, one thing I want to avoid here is making these grass or dirt pieces look like an obvious grid. I want the texture to be as seamless as possible, and brushing the tiles as they are means I'll hit a lot of the edges, which will outline them and make each tile feel very separate. Or, if I was careful not to hit the edges, I might get the inverse effect, where there's no highlight near those edges, giving each block a dark, obvious border. So I jumped over to Blender, used the Dungeon Blocks grid, and created some little jigs that I could slot the tiles into while I painted them, making a different jig for each surface, just tall enough that I wouldn't hit the edges of each tile, and making the design shallow enough that I can just pop the blocks out when I'm done, which let me paint these at a much faster pace. For the most part, I'll be using cheap craft paint from the hardware store. For our tiles, I'll be using a light grey, and if that's not quite light enough against the primer, I'll also use this cream. And I'll be using that same grey for the dirt pathways, giving them a dry dirt, almost gravel-like look. For the treetops, a mix of green and this yellow oxide ochre colour, and for the grass, a 1 to 2 mix of Army Painter's greenskin to rainforest green. And now, for the next couple of hours, I painted. And I painted. And I painted. If I may have just a moment of your time, please consider leaving a comment down below. It's the single best way to let YouTube know that you like what you're watching. Let me know what types of maps you would love to try and build in the Dungeon Blocks builder, or what official D&D maps you would love to build with the Dungeon Blocks system. Or just say hi. It's the single best way to let YouTube know that you like what you're watching, makes it far more likely for new people to discover the channel, and to help the channel to continue to grow. Right, let's get back to it. When I was laying these blocks out for a test fit, I was a little concerned by the fact that they felt the tiniest bit loose. Still totally usable and not a problem at all, but just something I noticed. And while I was painting, it kind of struck me. Intentional or not, that little bit of wiggle room means that with a layer of spray paint, these tiles will still fit together flawlessly, if not better than they would have without paint. With a lot of the systems I've tried to use in the past, once you get a layer of paint on stuff, it often reduces those tolerances and makes them hard to put together. But it was a really nice surprise that with the Dungeon Blocks, they still work just as well, if not better, once you get a layer of paint on them. To clarify, this video is not endorsed in any way by the Dungeon Blocks team. I just really like the system and the sculpts that they're putting out. And I already have my eye on the next volume of blocks that I want to get my hands on. They have a lot of medieval fantasy packs over there for games like D&D. But they also have a pretty cool looking spaceship for the sci-fi folks. Now that we have our mountain of plastic printed and painted, let's get to building our battle map. And when I tell you this was satisfying, having all the pieces just slot into place. No need to clip a bunch of pieces together, no need to install a bunch of magnets, and they all just fit. The tolerances are great. And having such a seamless grid all come together like this is beautiful. If the Dungeon Blocks team happened to see this, feel free to steal my idea for the paint jigs. It made the painting experience way faster, so much fun, and the payoff was awesome. Thanks again to Elegoo for sending me the Neptune 4 Pro, which we used to print all of the blocks that you saw here today. And again, those links are down below. Let me know down below if you want to see me print and paint any more dungeon blocks here on the channel, and which sets you might like to see next. Or, for anyone that's watching the D&D campaign over on Roll for Adventure, let me know what battle map you want to see recreated with dungeon blocks. Like if you liked, and subscribe to keep me popping up in your feed from time to time. But most importantly, thank you so much for watching. And as always, have a good one.